Hey everybody. I'm so glad to see you all. I gotta give you a little bit of warning though. Where we're going there probably isn't any ducks and we're gonna have to deal with a bunch of blood. But if we just target the right receptors, we'll be just fine. Well, I'm pretty sure I lost you all because those jokes are pretty endo-cringy if you get what I mean. Okay, I'll stop. But today, or right now, we'll be continuing with the endocrine system. So for the endocrine system, what I really wanted to focus on was the hypothalamus and the pituitary hormones because there are a lot of them and they can be pretty confusing if you don't know them already. So what I want to start off with is the difference between the anterior pituitary and the posterior pituitary. So we got the anterior pituitary and the posterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary is known as adenohypophysis, which means that the hypothalamus, which is known as the master gland, stimulates the anterior pituitary through hormones, while the posterior pituitary is known as neurohypophysis, which means that the hypothalamus stimulates the posterior pituitary through nerves. So let's move on to the anterior pituitary hormones, and this is also known as flat pig hormones. There's about six different hormones for the flat pig hormones. So we have FSH, LH, ACTH, TSH, prolactin, and GH. So let's start off with the first one. Oh, this is also known as flat pig. So let's start off with FSH. FSH is known as follicle stimulating hormone. And what follicle stimulating hormone is if you remember your reproductive system for females, it allows for follicle growth within the ovaries of a female reproductive system. And then we have LH, luteinizing hormone. Luteinizing hormone is also part of the female reproductive system, which allows for ovulation of the female egg. And ACTH is adenocorticotropic hormone, which basically regulates your cortisol levels within your body. Then you have TSH, which is thyroid stimulating hormone, which we'll talk about later. Then we have prolactin, and what prolactin does is it helps secrete sperm or milk within the human body. And then we have GH, and GH is known as growth hormone, which is pretty self-explanatory. It helps for the growth of major tissues, body tissues. Yeah. Okay, so now let's move on. So what we're going to talk about next is the regulation of the thyroid. And the regulation of the thyroid is through the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary. So let's start off with our little pathway. So we start off at the hypothalamus, which is our master gland, and the hypothalamus secretes TRH, which is thyrotropin. And what thyrotropin does, it stimulates the anterior pituitary to secrete TSH, which is thyroid stimulating hormone. And what thyroid stimulating hormone does, if you couldn't guess, it stimulates the thyroid. And when TSH stimulates the thyroid gland, it secretes the hormone T4 and T3, which is thyroxine hormones. And the basic functions of thyroxine is it has a lot of metabolic process properties. It increases your cut this part. Start again. About 3, 2, 1. Thyroxine has a lot of homeostatic functions, and what it does, it increases your metabolic rate, it increases your heart rate, and it increases your blood pressure. What it also does is it helps for the development of your nervous system and growth during early development. And it also increases protein synthesis. Anyways, when T3 and T4 is secreted, it causes a negative feedback loop, which then the secretion of T3 and T4 tell the anterior pituitary to stop secreting TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, and thus ends our pretty simple pathway. And now we'll move on to the posterior pituitary, right here, posterior pituitary. And it's pretty similar to the anterior pituitary. So we start off with the hypothalamus, master gland, and it stimulates the posterior pituitary with nerves. But what we're going to be talking about, it specifically, is oxytocin. So what the hypothalamus does is it also creates oxytocin But when it stimulates the posterior pituitary then secretes the oxytocin to be used in the body. And what oxytocin's functions are is it's used for pair bonding, it's used for the mammary glands, for breastfeeding, and it also is used for uterine contractions during childbirth. So there's a little, I guess, extra thing we should know about oxytocin and its properties. So for oxytocin, what it does is it can be used, it's used during childbirth. So what happens is when the child hits the cervix within the mother's womb, the cervix then stretches. When the cervix stretches, it causes nerves to be sent to the brain, which then causes your hypothalamus to then stimulate your posterior pituitary to secrete oxytocin, which then and this oxytocin being released to the uterus causes the uterus to contract. And when the uterus contracts, it causes the baby to hit its head on the cervix, thus causing this whole process to repeat over and over and over. And this is what you call a positive feedback loop. And that's what the whole thing about the posterior pituitary, it's operated by positive feedback. And yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about the endocrine system. It's pretty simple, right? Anyways, so before I go, remember, this is no place for any negative feedback. There's nothing that'll stop us from doing well in that final. And remember, this is no place for negative feedback. Nobody's gonna stop us from doing well in this final. All we need is a little bit of positive feedback, and we can make it through to the end. See you guys in the next video. Bye.